Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 450 chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it just bogs and it won't run decent. So let's look inside the fuel tank and see what he's burning for fuel. You know, it looked like it was decent fuel and it smelled good and there was a filter attached. And the reason I'm not going any further and pressure testing that line is because I want to just run this saw and see what he's experiencing. But before I do that, I want to look in the cylinder and make sure that it's not roached. So we're going to pull the plug, and it looks like he may have put a new plug in here. Looking inside the cylinder, I would say what I'm seeing is heavy wear. Possibly the beginnings of some scoring from running lean. Let's check the compression on here and see what we got. Well, I'm at 120 pounds. That's not great. You know, I use the 100-pound mark as the kind of the deal breaker number. We're not much over that. It'll run on 120, but again, it's showing signs of wear. I want to check this for spark, and it looks like we have spark. So I've seen enough now that we can test run this and experience what he's experiencing. Got that plug torqued down to spec. Get some schmutz out of here. Yeah. Let's prime it up. Primer feels normal. Pumping fuel and the bulb's returning normally. Yeah, that's not so good, is it? It just kind of bogs. And I'm thinking to myself that this has got a big air leak. And the reason I'm saying that is if the micro screen was plugged, the primer bulb wouldn't act normal. You push the primer in, and when you let go of it for it to return, it would be very slow if you had a plugged micro screen. It could have a stiff metering diaphragm, but it acts more like it's only getting fuel because I'm priming it and the fuel pump's not operating. And that could be because it's got a big air leak. Underneath here are 4 screws that hold the cylinder down to the crankcase. If these screws are loose, it could be the source of an air leak between the plastic crankcase and the cylinder. I've had it in the past where I could just tighten down these loose screws and it would seal up and the saw would run again. It really isn't the case here. But it is very wet around that area that connects the cylinder to the crankcase. Let's remove the starter and take a closer look at what we got going on back here. Yeah, your normal amount of schmutz on the air conductor and around the flywheel. But there's kind of an oily mess back here too. And there really shouldn't be an oily mess there. I'm trying to look behind the flywheel a little bit and see just how oily it is. If there's any evidence of the Permatex seal between the cylinder and the crankcase being blown out. But I'm not getting a very good look. I'm also checking the crank for play. I almost think I feel some, but it's not much. We're probably going to have to pressure test this thing and find out if we've got something going on here. Pulling on the chain will allow me to kind of do the same thing on the clutch side, see if that bearing wiggles or not. I'm going to put this back together and take another run at it. I like to associate the way things run with the actual problem. So the more I expose myself to particular air leaks or carb problems, the easier it is to diagnose them the next time. I'm still kind of thinking about this one. Probably going to have the finger tapping thing going on here in a minute. Let's try it again and see how it runs. Well, again, it acts like priming it up brings fuel to the carb, and it'll run on that fuel, but the fuel pump isn't bringing any more fuel up to the carb. That's why it runs good for a second and then just peters out. So that, you know, on some saws that could mean the impulse hose is broken, cracked, or missing. It could also mean that there's a big air leak and the pulse that normally would transfer from the crankcase to the fuel pump, you know, it's gone. It's lost in the air leak. You know, if I'm going to pressure test this or if I'm going to look at the carb, either way, the carb's got to come off. So that's what we're doing. We remove the 4 screws that hold the air filter base in place and then pop some lines off the primer bulb and 1 line off the carburetor. Now we have our secondary throttle assembly. It's kind of stuck on there. That's not really normal. Let me blow some schmutz out of here and clean this up a little bit before I expose the intake to all that dirt. So this secondary throttle assembly, there, I got it popped loose. Take a look at the linkage on it that goes to the carburetor so you can put it back together the same way. Now on the carburetor itself, I'm going to loosen up the fuel line a little bit. I'm not going to completely remove it because there is still fuel in the tank. Just kind of breaking the seal on it. And then I'm going to remove the throttle wire from the carburetor. And we'll break the carburetor free from the intake. And then finally remove that fuel line and plug it off. So we've harvested 1 carburetor. Now, when I first did this video, I couldn't really tell in this shot if I had opened up the carb or not. And that's because I'm looking at a 320p grainy video while I'm editing. For those that aren't familiar with the editing process when you're using a high-resolution camera, I'm shooting at 4K, 100 frames per second, and that really makes a big file. And those big files aren't easy to edit on the computer. Sometimes the computer will lag, bog, jump, buffer. So what we do is we make proxy files, which are low resolution versions of the larger videos. And we edit the proxy files and then they're converted to, in the rendering process, they use the original files to convert it into a video at the higher resolution you're seeing now. You know, filming at that higher frame rate allows me to leave the camera hanging above the bench and then just zoom in digitally in the editing process so you can get the video that you see now. The whole point of me telling you that story was that the grainy video that I'm looking at right now, I couldn't tell at first if I had been in that carburetor. I went back and looked afterwards and I was in there, and it must have been good because I'm pressure testing the saw now. So what I've done is I've added a piece of rubber between the muffler and the cylinder. I've taken some regular rubber corks, here they are, and I'm going to put these rubber stoppers into the intake holes. I've got an adapter in the spark plug hole that I'm going to connect an air line to. And we're going to plug off the impulse hole that comes from the crankcase. So what we're doing is sealing off the entire crankcase so we can pressure test it. We got one cork in already. Here's the second one. So we should be sealed off right now. Let's take our Mighty Vac MV8500 pump and try and put 7 pounds of pressure on here. Well, you can see that I can't put any pressure on here.
By golly.
There's a big leak somewhere. And when I have a situation like this where I can't even pressure test it, I want to know where that leak is. I'm going to hook it up to shop air. This isn't a great idea, but if you're careful, you'll be fine. So, if you put in 10 or more pounds of pressure in that crankcase, you take a chance on wrecking things, especially the crank seals. I'm going to hit the regulator on my shop air for 5 pounds. And I can test that with the Mighty Vac. So you can see I'm plugging the shop air into the Mighty Vac and I'm adjusting my regulator until I hit 5 pounds. And then I'll take a Velcro strap and I'll just lock that blow nozzle in the on position. So I'll have a consistent flow of 5 pounds of pressure into the crankcase. And then I can look around and sniff around and see if I can find my leak. I don't see anything at the intake. I don't see anything at the decomp or at my connection on the adapter. I'm kind of squirting around the seal between the muffler and the cylinder, and I don't see any bubbles there. Let's take a look behind the starter on this side. It's the easiest one to access right now because I still have the bar on here. And we'll spray some soap in back here and see if we can find any bubbles. I'm squirting at the base of the cylinder where it meets the plastic crankcase. We're going to get a better look at this. I've got a snap-on folding light here. It's kind of a lot like a high-speed, low-drag version of the Harbor Freight light that's so popular. We'll get this set up here so I can show you what I'm seeing. So we've got bubbles. We've got a massive air leak. And that is a massive air leak, by the way. Sometimes you'll be able to pump a crankcase up and you'll see the needle slowly dropping. Those kind of leaks don't look anything like this. So I want to pull this flywheel off so we can get a better look. I've backed the nut off on the flywheel till it's flush with the end of the crank. And then I'm just putting a pry bar behind the flywheel just to put a little pressure on it. And then I'll give the end of the crank a wrap. That wasn't enough. We're going to hit it harder. Here we go. Probably could have used a bigger hammer. I didn't wreck the threads though. You saw the nut came right off. So let's squirt some Mr. Bubbles on here and see what we got. That's bad. And it's also leaking around the crank seal too. Could this be fixed? Yeah. but it's not gonna be. The customer decided to buy a new chainsaw. So that's all I have for you on the Husky 450 that came with a big bog and it didn't leave fixed. Thanks for watching. Later.